we have five discussants or experts here, and I've been given 10 minutes extra to go along with it. So I presume the discussions will be very lively. The Indo-Pacific is important because, as I see it now, if you look at the world, what it's going through, and that was alluded to yesterday by the Secretary, we are in a churn. So there is a power transition that's underway. And this power transition obviously is not going to take place overnight. It will take the better part of 2 decades, in my opinion. But it is on. And I look at the power transition in a bigger, bringing in a historical perspective to it as well, which is fundamentally the world has been dominated by the European powers or Euro-American powers for nearly 500 years. And that is now being challenged. And if you've read Paul Kennedy's Rise and Fall of Great Powers, every hegemon ultimately ends up in a situation of overstretch, strategic overstretch. And that's exactly what the US is in. If you analyze the number of interventions it has actually done in the last, ever since the end of the Cold War. The US has intervened in military interventions of the US since 1776 to 2021 is about 392 interventions. It's about 160 odd interventions since the 1945. It's about 118 interventions since the end of the Cold War. So, in a very fine research analysis, Vijay Prashad brings out quite nicely the hyper-imperialism aspect of this entire process is that the US has, I normally believe that it has about 750 military bases around the world, but he's now pulled out the record from research processes and he's indicated 902 military bases around the world. And the involvement of the US in terms of control on intelligence processes and technologies through technology barriers, through economic pillars in which economic world order is controlled, this is all well known, starting off from the 1945 world architecture that they've crafted. If the undersea cables are looked at, it's no hub center can be managed by any people without the US intelligence clearance. Those countries that are involved in that process. Now, with the rise of China, now is this a challenge to the hegemon? Or is it a challenge to the Western dominance? I think 2 factors have actually highlighted that this is so. Not just the rise of China, the rise of India and the other countries as well, is that one is the war in Ukraine and the other one is war in Gaza. This has isolated the West, and the global North or the West is 49 countries against 145 countries of the global South. And this factor will play a major role given that the economies of global South have improved as well. Now, China has played along with the international systems and international order very intelligently. Ever since Deng Xiaoping initiated the modernization process, plugged China into the global economic system with the American assistance. But gradually, they've actually built their own independence by addressing education, research, and of course, dominating certain global multilateral institutions as well. And this is extremely important to note. So, when we've discussed in previous sessions about standards, China is in a position to rewrite standards in the global governance. And now, in terms of pure military power, while they have the economic power foundation, they have continuously increasing through the BRI kind of projects, they're increasing the influence in Africa, Latin America, and much of Asia. Their military power, today, 7 of the largest shipbuilding, ports, infrastructures of the largest 10 infrastructures in the world are in China. By 2030, China will have 370 warships. By 2035, 2040, it's likely to be 420 or 430, way above the American ones. The Americans will lead only in the aircraft carriers, but then by 2035, China is likely to have 5 aircraft carriers as well. But in the last week of December, China's test flying of 2 sixth-generation fighter aircraft has shaken the foundations of technological superiority. It's a Sputnik moment for the West. And then DeepSeek came in, it shattered the foundations of the IT dominance of the West as well. So these are the figures that are coming in. China's trade is 6.5 trillion plus last year across the world. And before they visualized Trump's coming in, they've catered for Trump's tariff challenges. And China's exposure on Trump's tariff strategy is not more than 2.8% of its GDP. They've expanded their trade with Global South phenomenally. So they're quite well prepared. So as the West now says, is China a threat to India's interests, to global interests? Is China trying to change the rules of the world international order? These are the questions that I pose to the experts. And more importantly, who's the threat? The US surrounds China with 55 military bases. And as I've told you, in the world, the US has about 902 military bases. So who's a threat to whom? And let me start with Erishika. And she's a China expert and leads the China-based study center. All yours.
Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here, and many congratulations to Dr. Pant and his team for organizing such a great event. Drawing from the points that Sir has just mentioned, yes, my main area of expertise, of course, is China, but I've also worked extensively on the Indo-Pacific with respect to minilaterals and the Quad. And I think while I would like to delve deeper into the questions posed by our esteemed moderator in the Q&A, I'd like to focus my remarks currently on the questions posed by the organizers in the brief that was provided. I think a lot of them do segue into what Sir has been talking about today. Jumping straight into the discussions, I'd like to focus my remarks on the concept itself of minilaterals, as the focus of this panel is to discuss the Indo-Pacific nexus and connect them to this broader ambit. So for the past year, I have had the privilege of being a fellow with the Quad Leaders Lead on Demand program. It's an initiative funded largely by the US State Department, and that program has taken me to Japan, Australia, the US, with a culminating event happening in ASEAN. And based on these engagements across these countries and spaces with policymakers and think tankers and government officials, I think there are a couple of insights that have become very crystal clear to me. The first, of course, is that the Indo-Pacific is not just a strategic geography, but that it is a contested space where the battle over rules, norms, and influence is just as significant as military posturing that Sir was elaborating on. Secondly, through these conversations, I've also understood that one of the Quad's greatest strengths is not just in its strategic coordination, but in its ability to shape these very norms that direct regional institutions and regional security governance. China's maritime assertiveness, of course, has undoubtedly reshaped the game of regional security calculations. But the responses from like-minded states have evolved beyond mere counterbalancing. This is where minilaterals, which are small, agile, purpose-driven coalitions, come into place. Rather than being traditional security alliances, of course, I believe they also serve as norm entrepreneurs, seeing and shaping governance principles that influence regional behavior. This has led to one of my more recent research projects, which is looking at minilaterals as norm entrepreneurs, specifically taking the case of the Quad. In that, I've argued consistently that the Quad's strategic influence lies not only in its abilities to provide military deterrence of any kind, but also in norm diffusion, actively reshaping the regional order by setting precedents in security, transparency, and maritime cooperation. There were a couple of questions posed to us by the organizers for this panel, and the first one, of course, is looking at divergences in threat perceptions. So, one of the key reasons I believe the Quad is as effective as it is precisely because it does not view China as a monolithic threat. Each of the Quad countries is approaching China with their own interests and their own challenges in mind. India looks at the Indian Ocean as well as our border dispute with China. Australia is looking at economic coercion and the Pacific Islands. Japan is looking at the Taiwan Strait and the East China Sea. And of course, the US is balancing things across the spectrum. This divergence is not, I believe, a weakness, but rather a feature that allows the Quad to build issue-based, flexible approaches to, as opposed to more rigid NATO-like alliance frameworks in dealing with these problems. Building this onto the Quad's security outlook and how the debate on traditional versus expansive discourse in the Indo-Pacific works, the Quad is often criticized for lacking a conventional security doctrine. But that assumes that security is only in the form of military deterrence. That is not true. The Quad's normative power in security is one of its strongest assets. And for example, the free and open Indo-Pacific narrative first articulated by Japan has now made its way into the diplospeak of countries across the world. China's own counter-narratives, which are calling FOIP a product of bloc politics and Cold War mentality, demonstrate just how deeply the Quad has influenced regional framing. Maritime exercises like Malabar, La Perouse, etc., they're not just about interoperability, but they're also about signaling a certain kind of adherence to international law, transparency, and access to global maritime commons, all key norms and requests made for the Indo-Pacific's long-term future stability. When we talk about turning this into a sustainable regional security architecture, it's important to note that the Quad is not trying to be ASEAN or NATO, nor should it be trying to be that. Instead, its success lies completely in norm diffusion, wherein its principles influence these broader regional organizations. For example, ASEAN's Indo-Pacific Outlook, AOIP, has derived a lot of things from Quad's FOIP vision, such as freedom of navigation, rule of law. Now, I would like to make it very clear that I'm not arguing that these terminologies didn't exist before the Quad came into being. They, of course, did. But what I'm talking about here is how center stage they became after the Quad came into existence, how ingrained into global diplospeak they became, and how much the Quad and other minilaterals that have derived from the Quad have shaped these discourses moving forward. The EU's Indo-Pacific strategy has derived from the FOIP narrative, and China's Himalayan Quad, GSI, the Global Security Initiative, reflect efforts to counterbalance these particular narratives, showing that it is the narrative more specifically that China is predominantly concerned with when it comes to the Quad, recognizing that it is not and will not be a military alliance as long as India is a part of it. This is the very power of norm entrepreneurship and the idea of reshaping regional security thinking without the rigidity of formal security alliance that these minilaterals are able to bring to the Indo-Pacific stage. In conclusion, I just argue that the Quad's success is not meant directly or just as a counterweight to China, but in setting terms of engagement for the Indo-Pacific as a whole. Security in the Indo-Pacific is no longer just about military deterrence. It is about defining the very frameworks within each of the Indo-Pacific actors, including China, should or must operate. And just the segue point at the end is whether the real strategic question, I don't think, is whether the Quad should become a traditional military alliance, but more whether it can continue shaping the region's normative discourse with a future-looking agenda that is inclusive and stable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rishika. You emphasized on the Quad quite well, and so that I'll take it from there for Ranjan. The Quad is a non-military alliance, and India traditionally has steadfastly stuck to its position that it will not join any military alliance. I think there's a lot of merit in that process. And therefore, India is actually, I would see India as a balancing actor where Quad otherwise could have taken a military dimension much more if India wasn't there. And that's probably the reason why they formed the AUKUS. So the AUKUS probably downsizes the Quad's benefits to a significant extent. And the Chinese see Quad as an alliance targeting China. So how do you actually resolve this issue, given the fact that in South China Sea, the conflicts are between China and few of the countries over territory, much like we have a boundary problem with China. So can we equate that as a threat to the international order from China?
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to extend my thanks to ORF for giving me this opportunity and Professor Harshpant. Few points I want to make at the beginning. Three important takeaways in my presentation. First, there are diverse threat perception, as the previous speaker said, and that requires tailored response. Two, we need to strengthen local capability, and that is very, very essential to make Quad successful and also to work on other aspects. And I think we need to think beyond Quad to strengthen regional cooperation. We need to recharge our multilateralism. So we are talking about Indo-Pacific region, which is a confluence of sea as well as civilization. And here this idea or discussion on Quad became more popular because we have rivalry between US and China. And that has created two major concerns. One issue is of over-deterrence. So US and China both are paying a lot of attention on creating deterrence, and China is responding to American efforts. And because of that, there is more instability or rivalry in the region, creating instability. And second trend we are seeing is decline of multilateralism. So there is more focus on making processes and less on progress. So these are two concerns, and that has led to further rise of security minilateralism, and Quad is one of that. If we look at the rise of minilateralism, there are three clear patterns, and that is a cause of concern or debate about it. And that's where India's position, sir, you highlighted, is very, very critical to keep that. So one, that United States plays key role in all those, central role in those minilaterals. There is explicit target in all these frameworks which are being created, and in this case, this target is China, to counterbalance China. Despite India is taking its position, India is also criticized that it's not joining whether joint patrol or other military activities. India is having different position. And also, these all minilaterals have, though they are more focused on security issues, there is a scope for expanding it to other areas, and India is pushing towards that. So basically, there is a debate between exclusive versus inclusive minilateralism, that security debate, where so Americans or some others countries, their approach is create institutional balancing approach, which is you exclude deliberately the target state and include all other members to balance that. So creating more competition, and so that is one. And when we look at India's approach, that is more inclusive, where you create norms, where you create structures and try to include the target state to follow that behavior or to put pressure, making them respond. Whether it's effective or not, that's a subject matter of debate. But inclusive approach India is taking, if we look at the philosophical roots of India, that's always argue for inclusive approach, the middle path India takes, where if we consider 4 petals of a lotus, India is one petal, and always accepting that other 3 petals are having different views, and together we make this lotus. It's and that's how world can be or order can be set. So it's very, very important, and we must put efforts to curtain this kind of proliferation of exclusive minilateralism, unless it's inclusive, it will not result in stability, it will not bring a stability. And any kind of exclusive competitive security groupings needs to be checked or reconsidered. We need to refocus on strengthening multilateral frameworks that are inclusive of all stakeholders. And that's, I think, India's approach. Coming back to my three suggestions, first, particularly, I'll focus on strengthening local capability, and in that, maritime domain awareness support is very, very important to provide technical assistance to enhance ability of the Indo-Pacific states, whether to monitor or patrol their waters, providing equipments or all kind of capabilities. Also analyzing data, how to analyze data and interpret their threat perceptions. Training and human resource development, that is another important area to build the capacity of local personnel in areas such as maritime law enforcement, search and rescue operations, disaster response, and environmental protection in maritime settings, different maritime settings. We also need to focus on enhancing Coast Guard and naval capabilities. Further, legal and institutional framework also requires attention, so support the development of robust legal frameworks for maritime security, including maritime law enforcement protocols, dispute resolution mechanisms, and international legal compliances. And finally, we need to build and strengthen regional partnership and networking. That is also very, very important. I will conclude by saying that we need to reinforce multilateralism. Inclusive and collaborative security frameworks will be essential in maintaining regional peace and preventing any kind of escalation of conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjan. Stuti, let me take off from where Ranjan has left, where he's emphasized on the importance of multilateralism, not in favor of minilateralism. And there's also been a fair amount of discussions and observations from various people that Quad must expand to Quad Plus and Quad Plus Plus, etc. So, will it serve the purpose if you expand Quad? That's one. And in the Indo-Pacific, the ASEAN has done an exemplary performance in managing, not only conflicts, but also promoting the cohesiveness of the ASEAN grouping. And given the fact that China has immense amount of trade relations with the ASEAN countries, Southeast Asian countries, how will expanding multilateralism, leaving China out in terms of Quad Plus Plus, will work in this entire process?
Thank you, and a very good afternoon to everybody. Thank you to Dr. Pant and Vivek for inviting me, and to the rest of the team of ORF. So I will take on the questions that Mathesar and Sir has posed, and I will start with saying that when we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, and here I'm looking at the geographical definition that India has of the region, you would find it's not a very homogeneous region. It has developing and developed economies. It has countries which follow very different political systems. Size of nations is different. Populations of nations are different. And the security challenges that they face, the threat perception and the capabilities they have are very different. Therefore, to say that everybody has the same priority when it comes to security threat is not there. They have very divergent views on how they view the Indo-Pacific per se. Some of them are still accepting the concept, but they have very divergent views also on what is a priority for them in terms of security. So I would like to point out that China might be a security concern for some. It might be a security concern for the rest, but it would not be the first one there. So that is one aspect of it. Now, in this entire thing, the Quad has made a lot of headway simply because it's a very flexible organization. It does not have, let's say, a declared system. It does not have a bureaucracy. It does not even have a headquarters. It is a very flexible system in which the 4 countries continuously are adding and to the agenda. It's like taking a step-by-step approach to it. Now, India is the only non-NATO ally or non-NATO nation in this, and that is, I would say, the strength of the Quad, because India being that kind of a country which is not an alliance member and has stated it will not be an alliance member, has added to the agenda that is the Quad. And to a large extent, it is because of this agenda development that a lot of countries have started approaching the Quad and looking at working with it. Because nations here, as was pointed out, have very close economic relations with China, and they have security partnerships with the US. They do not wish to be in a US versus China decision. They want to be on both sides. They don't want to choose a side. Now, Quad gives them that space where they can come in and start working on certain aspects which are important for them, but does not antagonize their relationship with China or with the United States. So if you're looking at the overall structure, the Quad adds to the I would say the security of the Indo-Pacific. And in this, you have to look at the definition of security in a larger, broader manner and not just keep it on a very traditional aspect of military. So the Quad's advantage is it is not a military alliance. It is not looking at just military security. Now, the fact that there are a lot of minilaterals in the Indo-Pacific, and here I would say, please do not limit your idea of the Indo-Pacific to just the eastern part of the Indian Ocean and Pacific. There is a Western Indian Ocean aspect, which for India is part of this Indo-Pacific. Now, these two, if I can put a line between them, these two sides do not have the same priorities and same security threats. But for India, both sides of the ocean are very important. So Quad is essentially right now primarily working on the eastern part of it, because that is where the threats they feel are more. And that is where we are working with ASEAN as an institution, which, as Sir pointed out, has done a lot of work in being the regional organization with which all countries are associated with when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. But minilaterals have given that space where countries can come together on very specific issues, work together, and that is it. They don't have to go with the entire multilateral agenda and agree to it. So in my opinion, the minilaterals add to the Quad. Not all minilaterals are successful, not all of them take off, but it provides that space to countries to come together on an issue. And for me, that is important because I personally feel any minilateral, it would be possibly on, let's say, fishing. But as countries come together, it opens a dialogue channel, which is important when you are working with each other, because that one dialogue channel can then lead to more dialogue channels. And that, I think, is the strength of the Quad when it's trying to build up or foster cooperation all around us. So for me, a traditional military maritime aspect would limit the Quad. And when we're looking at the aspect of Quad Plus, whether it happens or not is a question mark. For the moment, yes, the Quad members have said there is no plans for expansion. But the 4 countries, even if they don't expand, can actually, as the core, build an organization which works on a hub and spokes manner and continue to contribute to regional stability. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that you put that across very well. The minilaterals will add the strength of the multilaterals. That's an important one. And Quad can expand. Informally, the French are as good as part of it because we have a space constellation, a satellite constellation to be launched by India and France, which will cover both the entire interests of the Quad as well, the Indian Ocean. So in that context, I think these developments will add a lot of value into it. But let me come to Pooja. The main issue is, in the same context, is AUKUS a spoiler for good multilateralism and coordination between the countries of the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you for the question. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, ORF, for inviting me for this Think Tank Forum. In my last 1.5 days of discussions, I am very happy to hear that so many bright heads of different think tanks have come together to discuss on similar problems, but from different perspectives. And most of them, in most of the areas, we align. And there are so much scope where we can still align. So I'm very happy to be part of it. So before I can answer your question, allow me to talk largely about the entire idea of security architecture's Quad and then India's role in it, if I can just contextualize the entire thing. So to start with, the entire idea of security architectures, when it started from Cold War era, so and the world was divided then. We had bipolar world, we had US and Russia, and the countries were either forced to take sides on the basis of security threat. Security basically defense, defense version of it. Fast forward all these decades, now we are talking about a world where that bipolarity is not there. Countries have emerged to be middle powers and beyond. They want to participate in the architectures. So that is a very important point to understand. Second, security is now not only defined on the defense aspect of it. There is human angle attached to it. There is economic security, environmental security, societal security, what security, name it, and we have a defined. And also, this brings us back to the domain that we are talking about, Indo-Pacific. This also represents, we have shifted from the Atlantic era where, great power competition ruled. We are Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific is defined by the beaming demography, acts as markets. So now we are at a point where we might not need the world as much as the world needs us. And that is the entire idea why the USS and the, superpowers of the world want to engage in Indo-Pacific and coming out with their Indo-Pacific strategies. So we need to consider the context of security has changed, the domain has changed, where we are acting is different now. This brings me to my next point, that now when we have this new domain, how are the security architectures being defined? We are not having the superpowers being defining these, rules of engagement and of the architectures, what memberships will be there, what agenda setting. It will be the countries of the region. And that gives us more power to be, present in the norm setting, agenda setting, membership setting. And I think India in that regard is very much well placed to do that norm setting and agenda setting for Indo-Pacific. And I think yesterday we had this conversation that India does not have money. What can it do? How can it bring difference to multilateralism? And there's we can bring difference in the entire, because when India called for Voice of Global South, world came to us, and everyone was talking about, Vasudev Kutumbakam. That was the power of norm setting, and I think that's a very good example to take in other areas also. So our norm setting, I can say that this is an India version to it, but we also largely relate to the region. At certain levels, yes, we always can debate that how other countries might not have similar ideas. That's a debate of another time. But that is one. Second, I'm talking about the idea of Quad. Now, the Quad, again, came in 2017 when Trump was in his first presidency. He brought Quad back to power, with all those exercises. Now we have Trump again in power. But my concern in this regard of Trump coming back is one way Trump will revitalize Quad, will militarize Quad in more effective manner because he has China as its threat. He sees it as threat. He'll go powerfully about it. But on the other side, it might also create tensions in the region, because if you remember the last 2024 Wilmington Declaration that came out with the President Biden, it clearly set across the agenda as more human-centric for Quad. It was not just a security aspect, it was all what India also brought about human security, connectivity, and other issues of security. So the Quad agenda widened from only defense to larger security. For a scholar, is scared that we might go back to that very hard security, hard defense kind of approach to Quad with Trump coming back. And that will create issues in the region, because even though India is not willing to do that hard allianceship, we might have to pick up sides for our own reasons. So that would be one concern, and I think scholars here would want to consider that also, that what is the future of Quad. In that sense, India can play a role in making administration resistant. I don't have a better word, but to mean that irrespective of whichever administration in whichever country, Quad and similar institutions can remain unaffected by the change of administration. So the norms and agendas that are set once are not reflected or not changed with the change of administration in each of the countries is one of the ways we can go about. And last point quickly, Third thing, we have been discussing about resources. And one of the problems that with China and US great power competition we'll be seeing is the bifurcation of resources. Whether we talk about undersea cables, whether we talk about technology, supply chains, they both are providing alternate to each other. And the Indian Ocean country, or Indo-Pacific countries will be forced to choose either or sides. Are we ready to it? Do we want, to go China's supply chain or US supply chain? Because ultimately it's not possible to do so. So what do we think about it? So towards the end, I would want to answer this question about with AUKUS would be a spoiler. I think yes, if India does not step up to what Trump wants Quad to be, Trump might shift to Philippines because that provides the Squad version of Quad, where Philippines has everything that President Trump wants. It has bases, it has forces, it has everything. And we might have more Squad exercises than Quad exercises, and maybe AUKUS might be one of the alternate for that also. With that, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you. Just last week, the President of the Philippines has made a statement, almost reversing his stand. So it looks like Trump has got some influence, and we may see something different emerging. Anutama, let me now, with your National Maritime Foundation experience, so I'm going to put some question related to the hard power. Yes. In my analysis, while everybody says China is a threat because it's building a string of pearls, different routes are being set up for its sea lines of communication, fundamentally all that emerges from China's deep insecurity because of the long sea lines of communication. And if you see the track record of having intervened or imposed wars on others, there is no comparison between the US and China, right? So in that context, how should India deal with it? Our hard power is still way below what we should be if we want to be taken seriously as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean. And even the US supports that kind of an idea. So Andaman Nicobar Islands, if we develop it like the Pearl Harbor and Hawaii format, then you have some kind of a power projection ability and messaging that you are sending across to the people, both in terms of confidence as well as in terms of power projection. But we are building a transshipment hub there. Are we going to undermine our relations with Singapore with that? Will it serve our purpose? If we convert that into a huge commercial, the commercial viability of that is a different question. We won't even discuss that now. But what about the feelings of Colombo, Singapore, Malaysia, with this development that's going to come up there? And China equally is not sleeping. So they are developing their port in Cambodia, so they can overlook the Malacca Straits. The entire purpose is to address the Malacca dilemma, as Hu Jintao said in 2008. So while India can be in much more favorable positions, China probably will counter that to some extent. So let me hear that.
Thank you so much, sir. And I wanted to first of all thank the Observer Research Foundation and Dr. Pant and his entire team, especially Shairi, for this invitation. So when looking at the question of should the Quad adopt a traditional maritime security role in the Indo-Pacific, and whether the emergence of a regional institutional structure for maritime security cooperation would be helpful and sustainable to foster a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. If I were to answer those questions, I think we are doing all this and more at the moment. In that context, I would like to say that the Wilmington Summit has provided us with a strategic subtext to understand what the Quad actually wants to do, to understand the aims and objectives of the Quad. And as we all know, it has transitioned from being a consultative mechanism into a leader-level format now, and that shows how it is shaping the strategic discourse within the Indo-Pacific. In a more nuanced way, I would say that the Quad is now trying to shape the probable battle space, or shape the environment, and also as I said, the discourse through, and also build collective competence through engagement in capacity building and capability enhancement. These are two areas that India is also focusing on when it comes to what it is doing, what she's doing as part of the Quad. For instance, if I were to focus on the India-US bilateral construct, we've signed the 4 foundational agreements, COMCASA, BECA, LEMOA, GSMOI came in 2002. Now, if you look at the logistics agreements, I think that has a big role to play here, because we have the LEMOA with the US, the acquisition and cross-servicing agreement with Japan, and the mutual logistics supply agreement with Australia. Now we can make those work. If India were to see what it could do, that these logistics agreements provide us with the opportunity. The Quad provides India the opportunity to maneuver and calibrate, which is really important, because that doesn't bind India in a way, and which is really helpful, because we are also trying to shape the environment based on what is happening. So it is reactive. The Quad actually reacts to situations as opposed to just sermonizing or doing something. So I think that is a very useful way to look at it. I agree with most of the points that Irishika made, and she provided a degree of conceptual clarity on what the Quad wishes to do. In this regard, I would say that within the maritime domain, the Quad has envisaged a union of maritime multilateral constructs, because it spoke about the grouping support to regional constructs like ASEAN, IORA, and the Pacific Islands Forum in a previous statement. This enables us to see how India is viewing the Quad as the Indo-Pacific as India's strategic geography, and that enables India to shape the discourse as well. That also helps us to see how seas are central to our understanding of geopolitics today, which was not the case before, where we had a very continental understanding of geopolitics earlier. We are also in the realm of concepts. We are trying to, we could use the maritime legal dialogue within the Quad to further our, as a platform to enforce the significance of the rules-based international order. Another area that I think deserves a mention is HADR, which was how the Quad came into existence in 2004 after the Indian Ocean tsunami. The emphasis on HADR was subsequently followed by the creation of guidelines, and I think in consonance with the ION's HADR guidelines, we could actually see some more work there. These guidelines could strengthen coordination, improve interoperability, operational synergy between countries during disaster responses. So I think that continues to be important, because even the HADR exercises have now become combined in nature. That is really useful to understand the operational environment. So I think we need to keep these factors in mind when trying to understand the role played by the Quad and how India fits into that. The HADR tabletop exercises were, for instance, held in 2022 and 2023. So we need to keep an eye for that. And now, the Malabar exercise as well in this regard. On the capability building front, I think training of personnel on existing hospital ships and their potential acquisition by individual Quad army navies, I beg your pardon, could also strengthen HADR practices. In this regard, I do think India needs to invest in some capacity building, like acquire landing platform helicopters, multi-role supply ships, etc., to make it more comprehensive, our own understanding of what we want to do. I mean, a mention of IPMDA was made earlier, the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness. I mean, it's impossible to have complete maritime domain awareness ever, so maritime situational awareness is what we are looking at here. But the MDA can be a tool to facilitate or harness trust building between Quad members. I think it is an excellent confidence building measure, if I were to say so. And this is where India could play a big part through its Gurgaon-based IFCIOR, the Information Fusion Center for the Indo-Pacific region. Furthermore, India has initiated the Maitri initiative, which is the maritime initiative for training in the Indo-Pacific. So that will also facilitate more coordination. In addition, a small point from my side, because I've been working on this, I think shipbuilding, I mean, if not shipbuilding, then at least ship repair could become something important within the Quad, because US and Japan already have some degree of collaboration on this front, and India is looking at itself, is actually pitching itself as a ship repair hub, especially in the Indo-Pacific. We've had 3 ships visit from the United States for repairs, although they were US NS vessels and not USS vessels. That does show some degree of movement on what can be done. So I think that would be great if I'm thinking out of the box here, but potentially even have a working group on that. within the Quad. That would be excellent. So in that sense, maintenance, repair, and overhaul operations could actually become the next big thing within the Quad. We've seen the recent, discussions about the Ships for America Act also coming through in the United States, how India could become a more important partner there. That would be great, because we have, at the moment, India is a major defense partner, and not a NATO ally, as has been directly mentioned. But we do have possibilities there, and we can maneuver. So yeah, these are some of the things that I think we can do. As far as the ANN Islands, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands is concerned, so I think leveraging the logistic supply agreements could really help in that regard, because I mentioned this earlier as well. Right now, if we can do that, then definitely we can use that. I mean, in some degree for dual use purposes as well, without harming our interests, without harming our relationship with other friendly countries, with our other partners. So that will enable us to project our capabilities as well in the Bay of Bengal region, as well as as it is an important subset of the Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you, Anutama. There's also a big environmental considerations that have to come into place as well. I think let me open out to the audience, and I'll take the first round of questions. So I'll just take the first question from there. We'll take about 4 questions, and then we will move on to the second round.
My name is Imran Khurshid. I am a visiting research fellow at the International Center for Peace Studies, New Delhi.
And mention who are you directing the question to, or if it's to the all panelists.
It is to the all panelists.
Okay.
So we were talking about that the strength of the Quad is that it is focusing on both security areas and non-security areas. Although they are both strategic in nature. But do you not think that Quad is working because it is also in alignment with the existing geopolitical reality? I think if we had Quad during the Cold War era, it would not have worked. We have a international system where the countries are competing. We have a multipolar international system, so there is high uncertainty, high unpredictability. So we are focusing on the merits of the Quad. It is inflexible. It is informal. That gives countries greater scope. But we should also factor the nature of the international system, which is highly fluid. Because of the fluidity of the current international system, the Quad is also working. So that should be also taken into consideration. I would like to since I have my research has been on this topic, so I would like to counter some points. One of the panelists said that Indo-Pacific is defined by economic boom. It's not defined by the economic boom. Because due to globalization, this region was already, interconnected. It is the changing balance of power.
What is the question?
It is just, I want to refute 3 points, if you can allow me.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is a rapidly changing balance of power, and the strategic uncertainty that is creating. I mean to say that it is a changing balance of power that makes the Indo-Pacific, relevant, and that's why we have this. It is not the economic boom, because due to globalization, this region was already integrated. And my second point is that one of the panelists said that ox is a spoiler, but if you look the recent summit in Delaware, where the Prime Minister said that Quad is here to stay, to partner and to complement. So it clearly outlined that AUKUS is a supplementary framework, rather than seeing that it will spoil. And my third point is that we have to focus, as you said, Quad has to focus on both security and non-security areas. Yes, that is the strength of Quad, and I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Give the mic that side, please.
Thanks. I'm Dr. Manish Dabhade. I just wanted to, Rishika maybe can respond to this, that why are we not looking enough for the possible security shift or security turn of Quad? There are some real benefits out there, I think, which the region can benefit from, especially India can benefit from. I think we need to look much harder to that sort of aspect. Coming to Trump, good we got Trump back in the discussions, but I think at one level, 2017 Quad revival was about Trump injecting energy in many ways and even leadership. But what happens at one level if Trump is also looking to have a grand bargain with China? So where does that leave Quad with, and what sort of trajectory then we see for Quad? Thank you.
Thank you. Here.
A question to you, Mr. Matheshan. You said U.S. has about 902 military bases around the world. Now, from what is now emanating in the U.S. in terms of policy, this new Department of Government Expenditure, and on the other hand, Trump is also talking about peace. There's a bit of paradox there.
Dichotomy. Okay, that's right.
Dichotomy, in the sense that he's also talking about expanded military sales to India to reduce the trade deficit. So it's a kind of a potpourri. Having said that, do you think that the U.S. is going to reduce its armed bases? Number one. Number two, a question to Irishika. You spoke about, and this ties in with your point about AUKUS. Now, AUKUS is something which Australia needed. It's a kind of a minilateral. You can't ignore that fact. Of course, the French were very disappointed, but then the French themselves were responsible for the cancellation of their order of submarines. Now, how do you think this AUKUS is going to play out in the context of Quad, number one? Number two is, do you consider Indo-Pacific, as the Government of India defines as including the Eastern and Southern Africa? Two questions. Thank you.
Yeah. One more here, and Kabada Vasan. Two questions we'll take. After that, we'll come on to the next round.
Hi, I'm Rudraksh Neja, Director of the GeoJuris today. So my question is directed to Ms. Irshika. So the point that I'm raising here, and my argument is, while there exists a major pocket of distress against China within the Southeast Asian nations, we are hearing of the news such as signing up of an ASEAN-China free trade agreement. And while China is about to claim like 5 major disputes are raising around of the 5 maritime disputes that China has raised against the ASEAN nations. While there is still exists a major deterrence of Southeast Asian nations against China due to the economic imbalance, 3.6% of the total GDP of Southeast Asian nations have the trade deficit against China. And in case of India, we have an $83.6 billion of trade deficit with China. Why the why these multilateralism groupings or minilateralist grouping are not coming up with a framework like of a free trade agreement in themselves to make them economically viable as well as economically independent? Then there will be a second question of raising up an deterrence against China and standing up against them, because if there exists this flux in between of economic dependence, then it's very hard to stand up against China. So can you throw some light on this issue?
Okay. And last question from for this round. Okay.
Kabada Vasan, I run the Chennai Center for China Studies at Chennai. A question is to Pooja. This is regarding, while there is a consensus that a lot of other things within the Quad has worked, such as the STEM, the IPOI, and various other vaccine diplomacy. There's one thing which was also discussed yesterday about the failure of IPF, mainly related to trade. No, that's because if you are looking at trade, it's trade, Trump, tariff, and turbulence. So, do you think this is a weak link in the entire system of Quad, or will it lead to the collapse of the Quad as such? I'd like you to take on this.
Okay, so you want to start first? Okay, right.
Thank you. I seem to have quite a few questions on my plate, so I'll try to run through them as quickly as possible. With respect to the first question, I think from what I understood, your main question was whether Quad is working due to being geopolitically relevant or not, apart from the 3 points that you were elaborating on. I think that that's true for almost any grouping. If you're not geopolitically relevant, you will cease to perform in current times. I definitely Quad is performing because it is geopolitically relevant. And I think because of its flexible nature, it may continue to remain geopolitically relevant because it won't be constrained or bogged down by specific charters or conventions that, again, with broader multilaterals that we've seen, limit their ability to respond to these geopolitical threats. The second question was about why we are not looking enough at possible security shifts of the Quad and whether India can benefit from it. I think that based on whatever interactions I've had over the past 2 years on this topic, I personally believe that the Quad is still a very nascent minilateral. Despite its fame, it is still something that I like to say is in its trust building era. because when I was in Indonesia and Philippines speaking with people working on the Quad there, it was very clear that there's a lot of distrust and a general lack of understanding about what is the Quad, what is its point, and what is it going to do. So I do believe that right now looking at possible security shifts of the Quad is a little difficult. I think it would like to fixate on one of the main issues it is looking to focus on. It is expanding its outreach across multiple fronts, of course. So I do feel that it's still in its trust building era between the Quad partners as well. And maybe once we have moved beyond that, it'll look at possible shifts as well. All right. Talking about AUKUS, sir, how will it play out in context of the Quad? I don't think Quad and AUKUS, again, this is just my understanding of it, but I don't think they are in competition with each other. I personally believe that looking at minilaterals of any kind to be in competition with each other is not the best way to approach that situation. Even if we look at this Quad, for example, we were talking about the Philippines and that framework being settled, and immediately there was a lot of media frenzy that, okay, Quad is here, Quad's going to become obsolete. Same thing happened when AUKUS came out. AUKUS is here, Quad's not going to be relevant. I don't think that that's how it works, because each of them have different purpose-driven focus areas that they are looking at. And Squad, for example, looks at traditional hard security. Quad looks at public goods, public good infrastructure, and both are equally important. Similarly, for AUKUS, it is more a military pact. And again, that does sort of tie together.
It is a military pact.
Yes, that ties together to my norm entrepreneurship. Because if you look at
nuclear deterrence-based military pact.
Exactly, and if you look at the terminology of military pact, that is something that AUKUS made famous, just the way FOIP became famous with the Quad. So I don't think that they would be in competition per se. Speaking on my definition of the Indo-Pacific, I wholeheartedly agree with the definition that the government of India provides on the Indo-Pacific. I do feel that that is also going to keep changing in the future. But yes, my views on it are in alignment with the government of our country. To the last question, while there is a major pocket of distrust, China is going with ASEAN, why they're not looking at FTAs? I think that's a very, very interesting question, and it broadly connects to why Quad is not looking more into finance and economics. Increasingly, they are starting to do that. Like I mentioned, they're still in trust building stages, but they're looking at, there's something they've started known as looking at, of course, export credit with respect to countries, export credit agencies. And they've just signed an MOU last year looking to support business ventures and B2B connects and supply chain resilience with a focus on the ASEAN. Similarly, there's the investors network called Quinn that they've just started last year. The first meeting of it is still to be made. And more importantly, there's focus. An upcoming project of the Quad is Quad Development Finance Institutions and Agencies Framework. This is going to bring together JICA, India's Import-Export Bank, Australia and US's respective finance agencies to come together and provide solutions in real time to funding patterns and trade-related difficulties across the Indo-Pacific with a focus on Southeast Asia. So we are yet to see how that will play out. Its first meeting will be taking place in 2025. And I think they are sort of trending towards that understanding, but it remains a dialogue platform. Okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think you raised a question on the Quad's relevance. Ishika just pointed out that geopolitics is one of the reasons it came about, but you're comparing two very different time frames. This is, Cold War had different permutations and combinations, and countries' interests were different. Countries' interests change. They're not time-bound and they're not defined, they're static. So as countries' interests change, their relations with others change. I disagree with you when you say the Quad, the economic boom that the region is experiencing is not part of it. If you look at it, you would see that 40% of world economy GDP is generated by the countries of, if you look at the US definition of the Quad, which ends at Indian Ocean, the countries here are what are generating about 40% of the GDP. They are essentially the most populous countries of the world are here. and you have 5 rising economies in the next 2 or 3 years, which would be in this region. And that is going to be China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, and I think Japan or something like that. So economics is a major part of politics, because economy is what is running everything. Money is what runs a lot of things. So it is going to be part of the geopolitics of a region. And it is, when you're saying that globalization led to an economic boom, yes. But it is the globalization, the economic boom, which has brought the power structure also to this region. So now that the power structure is here, the region is making it count for itself by coming to the high table and now saying, we are going to set the agenda, we are going to set the norm, our voices need to be heard. So that is how it's going to go about. There was an issue, I think somebody asked a question about whether Trump coming in would lead to a change in the Quad. I personally do not think that is going to happen. First of all, when the first term, Trump has invested a lot of political capital in reviving the Quad. And while it was Prime Minister Abe who started the idea of the revival of the Quad, the US ran away with it. And the US kind of supporting it kind of got it the attention globally that it required. And thereafter you had Trump claiming that it was his idea to revive it. It was essentially not his idea. He's taken the credit for it. But essentially, because he has taken the credit for it, he's not going to let it collapse. The US last year, by a bipartisan support in the House of Representatives, has passed an act which is called the Strengthening of Quad Act. So it's right now pending before the Senate, and it is likely to get passed because the Republicans supported it in the House as well. So there is a lot of political capital that the US has invested. There is a lot of political capital that President Trump has invested in the Quad. And it also is beneficial to the United States to be part of an grouping which is not looking at just traditional military security. Thank you.
Thank you. Pooja, your question. That's right.
So some of the question Dr. Suti has already answered. So I'll take 2 questions that were directed to me. First was from my own professor, Dr. Bhade, and it's the roles reverse now, and he's asking me questions. So you have to forgive me if I don't reach the point. Okay. So he asked me whether Trump going and bargaining with China will impact the impact of Quad. So how I see it, there is a good reason why Trump, being a hardcore businessman, would go back and negotiate with China. But I think business is one part of it, and with Trump and his top team, if you see from the top men that he has collected right now, they all are very staunch some of them ex-military, ex-intelligence guys who has a very astute vision towards China and Taiwan issue. I think militarily still US will remain engaged in Quad in terms of challenging the China threat in South China Sea and Taiwan Strait. So I don't think even if he goes and negotiates on the trade aspects with China, US will back down on the military threat of it. That would be my answer. Hope I pass. Second, economies. Sir had asked me if the economies, IPF collapse would impact the Quad. Again, US was interested in IPF, India was not. We had interests and all that. I do not see, Trump is self-acclaimed no FTA fan of it. So I don't think he would want a thing like IPF as it is going, because he doesn't believe in FTAs much. So for him, IPF, I do not think matters much.
It's transactional. So
it's very, very transactional. So I don't think if IPF doesn't work out for him, I think it would be good till the time. And I would take from the previous conversation that Irishka also mentioned, Dr. Stuti also mentioned, that Quad remain. India continues to be a norm setter for Quad. We have reached from wherever we were to Wilmington Declaration, and I would say, because India was one country that expanded, took its time to expand the agenda of Quad from hardcore military to a larger security. And with Trump's re-election for next 5 years, we might go back to more military and less of human security angle. And that's why I made that point that we may have to start working towards making these institutions administration proof. That was my idea of
Thank you, Pooja. Anutama, you want to say anything?
So maybe just, on the question of Trump and China, just a quick point. I think when it comes to institutions like the IPEF and its failure, every administration comes in there, they bring in something new along with it. So it is possible. I do not negate the possibility that IPF may cease to exist now, but we could have something new in its place as well. That possibility exists, and I think nomenclature plays a big part here, because there's always something new coming up, and because it's a question of legacy as well. So that is something which I would point out, and in that sense, India and United States, their bilateral trade is also increasing. So we may see a transition to and shift towards viewing that in more favorable terms, as opposed to just seeing it within the IPF framework. So just that point, yeah.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next round, but before that, let me answer.
One more question.
Yeah, okay.
Can I come on that question?
Just give a mic there.
In this discussion, I think one thing I was complimenting the excellent panel, all of you. If questions have not been raised to any of you, please consider that what you said was very clear, and therefore it did not require any elucidation. But the important question is what I see now is between India and China there is increasing detente. And that is going to impact as to how we behave in the international arena and elsewhere. What do you say about that? Okay. Each of you, to all the panelists.
Okay, before that, I'll just answer your first question on 902 basis. Every hegemon will never back down. They would want to maintain. It's the military expenditure or defense expenditure of the US is $1.6 trillion last year. Without the dollar being reserve currency and the ability to keep printing whenever they want, it is unsustainable. That's one. And as the competition gets intense, they're going to have to come to accept at some point of time, the US will have to accept that, yes, the world will now become a multipolar, go back to 19th century European concert of powers. But that's going to take a long time. But till that time, they'll keep wasting money on this 902 basis. That's one. About almost 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, I attended a conference in Taipei where Barry Buzan was the keynote speaker. And he said, in the 21st century, superpowers will be dead. There will be no superpowers. And it will be a concert that will develop. It will be a multipolar world. And the earlier a superpower accepts that reality, it's better for that. So that's the way it was. We'll go for the next round. We'll take as quickly. Short questions. We have just about 9 minutes. Yeah. Major General Ashok. Yeah.
I'm John Goswami from USA. This trend, what comes out whenever Americans pull out from some place, they are already planning something at some location. Yeah, that has been trend. This thing. And now Trump giving an indication that Ukraine he will try to get it resolved. So will, in anybody's view, the Indo-Pacific will be the next to resolve, sort out the China, because Ukraine they used for Russia. So Indo-Pacific, can it be used by them? And who can be the puppet like Ukraine in the Indo-Pacific region? Let's see. And I think it was Anutama who used this term, battle space, shaping of battle space. So do you think that this Quad is shifting from the diplomatic alliance to the strategic alliance or a combined alliance against China in a way? If so, then does India will be a part of that?
Yeah, thank you. Next one, here. Right.
I'm Steve, senior researcher at GeoJurist today. My question is to Rishika. You talked about emphasized on flexibility and informality of Quad as its strength. G7 started in the same way. It's an informal, flexible organization with no permanent secretariat of its own. Well, the situation today is that it has made a lot of policy statements, be it PGII, be it its investments in Africa for infrastructure. Question. So do you think the lack of permanent secretariat for G7 can lead to the same thing with big statements but not the capacity to follow up on the statements?
Okay. Who else there? Please point your questions to Dr. Rajiv Ranjan or Stuti or Anutama?
I'm Akshay from OKD Institute, Guwahati. Actually, from Bay of Bengal to Southeast Asia to Indo-Pacific, we are actually, changing our contours, geopolitical contours, or widening our geopolitical contours. My point is, how do we figure or position the crucial geography Northeast India as a only land border or surface connectivity to Southeast Asia in this changing, contours of our geopolitics? Yeah.
Thank you. One last question we can take. Somebody was raising a question there behind. Yeah, sure.
I am Mohan Kumar from Public Policy Research Institute, Trivandrum. See, I have a simple question. Like in the present era of ethno-nationalism and ultra-nationalism, that has been spearheading the world over, which is led by the US and in the present regime as well as in Trump 1, where EU, some of the countries in EU has also gone to the extreme nationalism. Can multilateralism and the G20 kind of organization coexist with this kind of ultra-nationalism?
Okay, a quick answer to that question is Trump's histrionics is an interlude for 4 years. Just live with it. I think much will happen on that. The world will change to multilateralism. It is changing to multilateralism. Not much can be done about it in trying to revive and get back the US hegemony or the world order that existed before 1991. So that, I think we need to probably work on that. If India accepts that, if India recognizes that, then we will work on that part gradually and very comfortably in our own way. Yeah, okay. So answers, you want to respond to the questions? You can start from Anutama. Okay.
Thank you so much, sir, for the question. When I say that we are actually trying to shape the environment or the operational battle space, I'm also looking at all the different aspects attached to it, whether it's the intellectual, military, or the diplomatic, because I think we are trying to adopt a more dime-based approach to understand how we could use the Quad as a tool. If I were to specifically look at the military implications, I would say that we have the LEMO agreement in place. We have variants of it in place, which I've talked about, whether it's with Japan in terms of AXA. We have talked about the MLS, the Mutual Logistics Supply Agreement with Australia, and we have a similar agreement with the UK. So those kinds of agreements within the 2+2 framework enable us to see how best we can, manage the China threat. The objective is to manage, and first of all, we have to come up with a definite vocabulary as to how we wish to define this, because there shouldn't be any disagreement, I hope, within the members. It is something that we need to come up with and then take it forward. Another area that I think which is becoming bigger is the defense acquisition front. For instance, we want to co-produce weapon systems. So that element also has to be kept in mind when we talk about interoperability, how we are trying to expand that, come up with a clear construct of what we wish to see as interoperability. I have read I have seen references in the United States about it, but still there is very little dialogue on how we actually wish to enhance it. I've come across literature on it of different nature, but what is it that we want to really do in a genuine contingency, something that we have to come up we have to discuss more. Another area could be, so just one last point, could be the replication of forums like the Index with other countries. Maybe that could, the India-US defense acceleration ecosystem has been a success. So maybe with France, we've seen something like the FRINDX or others. So maybe those are also things which can help us to kind of shape the environment and understand what we are looking at. Thank you.
Pooja?
So I have, from whatever I remember of China and having been there, I think as a person, I have studied in the UK and have met Chinese people. They feel that they have undergone historic humiliation because of finance imperialism, because of the wars, the opium wars, and I can only give you a very personal opinion on this subject as opposed to just saying how I see it. So I do think that it's not just India that they are trying to counter here. It's the idea of Western hegemony, because they feel that they have undergone historic wrongdoing, so they want to re-establish that. If you look at Xi Jinping's China Dream project or his idea of the rejuvenation of the China dream, or how they want to see it's their destiny to become a great power again. All that has, India is just one of the many countries they are looking at. India is not the only country. So I think it is a larger agenda. When we look at Dayton, I mean, they do not see India as enemy number one or anything.
Anutama, we can continue after this. Yeah.
So that's my...
Quickly.
We can discuss this.
30 seconds each.
One line to the question that you asked, that Trump will use Indo-Pacific against China. That is the fear now, that Trump will try to do that, and we might end up seeing more of the military partnership, military sales, AUKUS, Quad happening. And that seems to be a reality in the coming times.
But will India be part of it?
I don't think so.
To your question, yes, Trump has an ultra-nationalist position on things, but please do understand that the office that he occupies, the bureaucracy that there is a system in place in the country that also steps up. So there is a system which will counter a lot of things that he comes up with. All of his ideas will not come about. And to your question on flexibility of the Quad, the flexibility of the Quad, the fact that it does not have a bureaucracy, not all initiatives will work out, but its initiatives are working. So it might not just go the G7 way.
Ranjan?
Very quickly, sir. Geoeconomics and geopolitics are two sides of the same coin. So politics of excess will shape the regional balance in this entire Indo-Pacific region. And two, how do we figure the crucial geography, which means I think it's very difficult to draw a line. So maritime and land all are being seen as a holistic, and that's where India's approach is. So Bay of Bengal and ASEAN both are central to this entire discourse.
Yeah.
Right. On the question of the G7 Quad comparison, we can discuss more later, but I think you answered it in the question. G7 has a presidential setup, which means one country is sort of dictating what the focus is going to be that year. The Quad hosts everybody, and everybody's points are welcome at the same level. With respect to the China-India Dayton situation, that's too much to cover in just 30 seconds, but all I can say is it's a very delicate piece, and we don't know when it will shatter on or what. Yes, I think maybe...
I'll just say that. Okay, just in a short while, and we can discuss that later. I think that's the only way we need to move. That's the only way we need to move.
That is the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And it is possible, provided we keep the first statement that I made, is the Western-dominated world order of 500 years is coming to rationalizing a new multipolar world order across the globe. And two are civilizational states. The DNAs are different. The Western DNA is different and our DNA is different. The way we deal with conflicts and problems. There's a lot we can do together. That's the only way forward. Thank you very much for this wonderful panel. We've run out of time. And please give them a big hand. And thank you very much. And thank you, ORF, for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.